Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. And I'm here today to talk about food preservation if you're just starting out or if you just have a budget you got to stick to. Now, right off the bat, just to let you know, when I first started getting more serious into food preservation, and this is beyond just throwing things into the freezer, we didn't have a lot of money to spare. We had to be very tight with our money and very careful with how we spent it. And so I didn't run out and invest in a dehydrator. In fact, it wasn't something I hadn't even thought of for a long time. I didn't even know back then that people could actually buy dehydrators for themselves to use. So the very first thing I started doing was actually water bath canning. But another thing I did in that time was I did dehydrate some jerky, and I did it using my range. So what I think when you're first getting into food preservation, and again, this is going to be outside the freezer, because first of all, if you're wanting to freeze a lot of food, you have to invest in a pretty good sized freezer to freeze enough food to make it worthwhile. And then there's other factors you have to consider. Is what if there's a power outage? Do you have a way to keep that freezer running? Well, that could be another expense, making sure that you have some kind of generator to keep it running. There are things you can do during a power outage to help keep your frozen foods frozen, such as throwing a lot of quilts on top of your freezer, especially if you have a chest freezer. That's one reason why we went with a big chest freezer, not an upright. Uprights are easier, but your food's going to thaw out a lot quicker in an upright than in a chest freezer. But you can also throw lots of quilts and stuff over the top of it to help insulate it better, to make things stay frozen longer. And the more full your freezer is, the longer things are going to stay frozen. So that means if you have any empty space, fill it up with those little ice packs that you get from your Misfits market or any other type of thing where you order cold and frozen type items. Or filling up juice bottles, the plastic kind, or water bottles or milk jugs, and with just tap water, and sticking them in there so that they will freeze and keep. Then when the power goes out, you have plenty of stuff in there packing that tight to keep things frozen. So that's kind of a side issue. But anyway, aside from that, really, I believe the cheapest way to get started is actually dehydrating. And the reason why is because you do not have to invest in anything fancy. You can do dehydrating with just your oven. Now, this isn't going to be the best choice for herbs because you can easily get the oven too hot, and you do have to realize that the oven does need to stay cracked open so that the moisture can escape, and you're also getting airflow, but you also have that heat. So whenever you're using the oven as a dehydrator, you set it on the lowest heat, and you can just put stuff on cookie sheets. The thing I like to use best for that kind of thing is using the stoneware cookie sheets. I think they're the best for dehydrating, but really any of them will work. Now, I use the stoneware ones during the winter when I'm drying stuff on top of the wood stove, and I have a lot of tiny little things. Then, whether it be back when I used to soak my grains and then dry them out before I ground them up, I'd put the grains on that stoneware cookie sheet and then put it on top of that rack that Patrick built me specifically for drying foods. And I've also done that with ground meat, which I didn't take a picture of, and I've also done that with turkey or chicken when I was dehydrating that on top of the wood stove. So you can dehydrate pretty much anything. Yes, you can dehydrate raw eggs. I started doing that last year and have been absolutely thrilled with it. Takes up far less room. I don't have to store my eggs in the freezer, and I don't have to use the water glass / lime water method that can take up a lot of room and doesn't have near the shelf life that dehydrated eggs do. And I can't remember how many dozen eggs I figured I have dehydrated up now, but I know I have 1.5 gallons worth of dehydrated eggs put up. I can't remember what the total is. I might have mentioned that in another video, but I'll link you back to the video I did on dehydrating eggs. I also, even though I like to buy milk already dried just because of the cost of milk here anyway to get organic as it is, I did try dehydrating some milk myself just to see how it was going to turn out, and it turned out perfect. Just as good, if not better, than any store-bought whole organic dried milk that I've ever purchased. I have a video that just came out on dehydrating ground meats, including Italian sausage with the fat and all the seasonings left right in there. Actually, I'm just going to link to my whole dehydrating playlist. It's going to be long though, because some of the videos are going to go clear back to 2016, and I have changed and morphed things along the way. And so I do like to link you to my most recent videos. I've also dehydrated cheese and powdered it up, and it works great for making a cheese sauce or to sprinkle on popcorn or whatever else. And I've also dehydrated broth. So even though I do a lot of dehydrating of herbs, like you see here, calendula, peppermint. I also like to dehydrate some vegetables. Mushrooms especially are great dehydrated. And snow peas dehydrate up beautifully. So do green beans, carrots. You can dehydrate anything. Some stuff, like carrots in particular, might rehydrate better if you blanch it first, but I pretty much don't blanch anything. Now this year I do plan on dehydrating some of my potatoes. Potatoes for sure are the one thing you do need to blanch. You need to cook a little bit first, otherwise they'll turn black when you dehydrate them. But most of the time, like with peas, no, never blanch. Same thing with rhubarb. I've dehydrated rhubarb. I've done it blanched and unblanched. Unblanched is better and easier and less messy. So it's easy. You can do this. And again, you can do any of this with just your oven. I think it was last year or the year before, I did a video on various methods you can use for dehydrating, which includes making your own dehydrator. Especially if you live in a dry climate, there's a lot you can do just by laying stuff out in a tray, out where it can get plenty of heat and air. And it doesn't need anything special. Now here, because we're so humid, that I run electric dehydrators, but I run it off our solar power. So if you live in a more humid climate like us and you don't have the money to invest in dehydrators, I do cover a lot of different options in that video. And then also in another video I did last year, I did a breakdown on at least 3 or 4 different brands of dehydrators. So you can go back and check that out and figure out which style, which type is going to fit best into your budget as well as into your lifestyle. What's going to work best for you? Because I have the cabinet style, which you'll see back here, the Kasori, which I do love. And because the door, you don't have to lift it off. It actually is a cabinet. It actually opens and closes. I love this thing. And it dries everything evenly, but I don't like it for everything. I like my Nescos for other things. And I do cover all that in that video. And also in one I think might have recently come out. If I remember what it is, I'll put it down below. Anyway, just start with your oven. Then as you're saving a little money, putting a little money aside, even if it's just a couple of dollars a month or a week, then eventually you can figure out what dehydrator is going to suit you best, or if you even need to do that. Maybe your DIY dehydrator is working perfect for you. Or even just like when it comes to herbs, it can be as simple as just hanging them anywhere. And the hill people, they used to do, what do they call it? I can't even remember the name of it now. It's just totally had a blank spot. I'll put it here in text. A lot of you will know right off the bat what I'm talking about. But anyway, the hill people used to just string their beans up. They'd actually put a string through it and alternate the beans this way and that way and this way and that way and let them dry like that. So there's plenty of ways that you can dehydrate foods. And remember, people have been dehydrating foods for centuries. The Native Americans dehydrated a lot of things. They dehydrated their meat and they stored it in fat in the form of pemmican, their berries, their grains, and various other things. And they did that all without any kind of special equipment, as far as they obviously didn't have electricity or dehydrators or freeze dryers for that matter. So they did all that without any of that fancy stuff. And you can too. It's just a matter of being creative and working with what you have. But again, also your climate will have a say in what's going to work best for you as well, and the amount of space you have. So then the next step up would be to start getting into the water bath canning, if you haven't already, because that can be as simple as doing things in smaller jars with the biggest pan that you have. The main thing you need is you're still going to need your canning jars for that, and you're going to need something to put on the bottom of your pan, because you don't want your glass jars sitting at the bottom of the pan right next to the heat source. In fact, when I first got started, I just used whatever pan I had, And I actually folded up a kitchen towel and put it on the bottom, so that would at least give a little space between the bottom of the jar. I never had any issues with my jars breaking, never, when I did that. And I was water bath canning peaches and anything else, salsas, anything else that I could do that was a water bath method, and do it in a pan where I can fit it in there. And then eventually finally got a canner, which is bigger. Your water bath canners, usually you'll find them in that granite ware, and they're getting more expensive now. But I found one at a garage sale that was brand new, never used, for $10 with the rack, the lid, the pot, and that was a good deal. Even though I already had one, I went ahead and grabbed it, because those big pots are good for a lot of things. So don't forget, when it comes to looking for any of this stuff, be it dehydrators, freeze dryers, canners, look secondhand. If you have a Facebook account, Facebook Market is a great place to find that stuff. In fact, Patrick uses, I'm not on my Heidi Rain Country Facebook account anymore, but Patrick uses it all the time to shop for things on Facebook Market, because you can find things most local to you. You can find out about garage sales that are going on as well, and often get a better price there than you can on eBay. eBay is another place you can go, but usually things cost more on eBay, I've noticed, and Etsy, because people do sell stuff secondhand on Etsy as well. And then obviously there's Craigslist, but I like Facebook Market better myself, a lot better than Craigslist. But also shop, if you like to get out on the weekends, go looking at your local garage sales, yard sales, rummage sales. Somebody's always selling something, be it jars or dehydrators. Two of the dehydrators I have, I paid $5 for one and $3 for another. I got at garage sales. And they were, I think one was never used and one looked like it was hardly used at all. And so you can get some pretty good deals shopping at garage sales. Don't dismiss those if you're really looking, because a lot of people will go, oh, I'm going to get into doing this and that, and then they realize it's just too much work and they don't want to bother, and then they turn around and sell the stuff. So look at these places first before you try to invest in something brand new, because a lot of times all the ones I've got were in great working condition, anything like that. And then there was, if you go the next step up, getting into pressure canning is more expensive, because the pressure canners are even more expensive. Now, I do have the All-American, which I do highly recommend, but there are the other common brands out there that work great, and they're a lot less expensive. I went with the All-American because I like the fact that it was very heavy duty, that it was made in America, and that I never had to replace the gasket on the lid, because there is no gasket on the lid because it doesn't need one. My oldest son's wife, she's eventually wanting to get into canning, and she has been doing some canning actually, but she hasn't been into pressure canning yet, and so she's been wanting a canner. And so the neighbor down the road was having a garage sale. It was, the lady had passed away, and so the family was just selling off, you know, doing an estate sale. And they had two pressure canners, all American. One looked brand new, never used. The other one looked like it had hardly been used. Two different sizes. And she was going to charge us just $10 for both of them. $10, so $5 a piece. We went ahead and gave her a 20, which even then I still felt like we were being cheap, because $20 for two All-American canners is an excellent deal. And so I gave my daughter-in-law the bigger one and then kept the smaller one. So either if my other daughter-in-law ever wants to get into canning, at least she has something to start with, or if I ever want to pressure can just a real small amount, then I'd much rather have that small one for that instead of heating up my big one, because I will not run my big canner if I've got only a few jars to can. So I only am going to can if I can fill up that canner. And again, I'm going to come back, jars. A lot of the jars we have, I either bought them for cheap at a garage sale, or we went to a garage sale where people were just giving them away, or neighbors and family were giving them away and just had them sitting alongside the road, said, free, please take, and we did. So we have tons and tons of canning jars, and a lot of them we didn't have to buy. So to always keep looking. You can do this, and it can cost very little if you know who to ask, where to look, and even ask family members that used to can that maybe it doesn't seem like they're canning anymore. Ask them, just ask them to say, hey, are you still canning? And if they say no, I'm not doing it anymore, then ask them if they still have their equipment, if they're willing to sell it. And it might even be, especially if they're family, they might give you a lot of that stuff just to get it out of their way. And then the very last thing I would say, invest in, this should be the last thing, not the first. And this is one of the reasons I wanted to do this video. And a lot of you have heard me talk about it quite a bit. And some people get a little bent out of shape because they think I'm against freeze drying. No, I'm absolutely not. I don't hate freeze dryers. I don't even hate freeze dried food, generally speaking. I like some of it pretty good. But what bothers me is when I see a lot of people feeling pressured about buying a product that's very expensive that they may not even like. Before you get into really seriously considering, a few things you got to know is a lot of the people, I don't know about all of them, but there are channels out there that have freeze dryers. And again, I have nothing against that. They love them. That's great. But you also have to understand a lot of these people were given the freeze dryer in exchange for doing the video reviews. In fact, that's how we got some of our things. But sometimes companies just step up and say, hey, would you be interested in this? And we'll give you this if you do a video review. And we'll say, sure. If it's something we're interested in, we will. If we're not interested in it, the email gets deleted. And sometimes we hunt them out ourselves. So like we did with the Reolink camera and a couple of other products that we have. So I don't blame them for that. I think it's a great exchange. I just think you should know that some of these more expensive products, some of these people are getting for free in exchange for the video review. You should not feel pressured into it just because they have it. And it's the same thing like I mentioned about dehydrators in another video. Some people will say, well, Excalibur is the only, if you're a serious dehydrator, then you should get an Excalibur. Well, a lot of people like them. I'm personally not interested in one. I was years and years ago until I started doing more research. Same thing with freeze dryers. I was interested for a while, but the more research I did on these things and the deeper I looked and started looking at the science about freeze drying compared to dehydrating and what they're comparing when they're talking about nutrients, and realized there's not as big of a difference as they're making you believe when you actually compare the numbers. And I did invest in different freeze-dried foods so I could taste them and try them and see what I like best before I considered buying a freeze dryer, because I didn't want to spend that kind of money just to find out I didn't like it or I'm not going to use it as much. And all the different factors involved with the freeze dryer, while there are some definitely good benefits to it, there just wasn't enough benefits to outweigh the negatives to me. And so I cover all that in a video I did over a year ago about freeze drying versus dehydrating. And even then, when I shot that video, I hadn't got into dehydrating the eggs, the milk. I'd already been drying meats, but not in the same way I've been doing since. And broth, and cheese. So that was before all that. And once I started doing my own experience, I realized, wow, I can do all this stuff with a dehydrator. I do not need an expensive freeze dryer for that. Yes, you will preserve more vitamin C and vitamin A simply because heat destroys these two things. So by freeze drying, you will do that. However, if you're going to cook that freeze-dried food, you're going to lose the same nutrients you saved by freeze drying. So you're not, unless you're planning on eating it right out of the container that you store it in, you really haven't saved anything. And then if you're storing the freeze-dried food in jars like this, and you're not keeping it in a dark place and in a cool place, you're still going to lose those same nutrients over time. So it's important to understand all that. But again, there's certain things you simply can't do with a dehydrator, like dried ice cream. I've never tried it. I've heard it's a pretty tasty thing, but to me, that's just a treat. That's not something, there's other treats I can make. I don't have to have freeze-dried ice cream. I can do without that. I can even do without the freeze-dried fruits that I like so much, because things like pineapple dehydrate up just as tasty as freeze-dried. They're just a different texture. Not all fruits hold the same flavor like they do in freeze-dried, and that's the one thing I find that's the one give and take for me is a lot of the freeze-dried fruits. But when it comes to the vegetables or anything else, nah, I found I found out I'm just happy enough to either freeze or dehydrate those. Just depends on how I plan on using them. So again, there's all these factors you got to figure in. So please, if you're considering a freeze dryer, don't feel pressured into it first of all. Just because other people are doing it and talking about it and saying it's the best method. No, it's not the best method. It's the best method for that person, very likely. It may not be the best for you. I know I've decided it's not the best for me. So you got to take everything into consideration and look at it for your own self and decide based on that. Again, I always recommend trying, Mother Earth products I've been dealing with for years because I love their company. I love the people. They're wonderful people, very personable, very nice, and very helpful. And they're starting to carry more organic stuff. So yes, now and then I will stock up on some of the organic freeze-dried stuff because of the things that I can do with it. But typically it's just going to be the fruit and some of their dehydrated stuff just so I can have more on hand. Because like carrots, we just never quite grow enough carrots. Well, I can just buy already dehydrated carrots that I can throw into anything. And so there is some of that stuff. And I'll link to my most recent video that I did on Mother Earth products down below if you're curious. But I recommend trying freeze-dried foods long before you invest. And then also, again, check out that video and realize how many things you can actually do with a dehydrator that are just as good. And also, the other thing I did mention is that freeze-dried foods typically will take up a lot more room in storage than your dehydrated goods. Dehydrated goods will shrink down much smaller, and thus you can fit them in smaller jars, and then thus giving you more room in your food storage for other things. I got to stress it again because some people get so angry, those that already have freeze dryers get angry whenever I mention this. Don't be angry. It's got to be a matter of choice. No one should feel pressured into it. If you love yours, that is great. I am glad. I would rather see people that spent that kind of money on a freeze dryer absolutely love it, rather than being like the several that have contacted me since and told me how much they hate their freeze dryer or how they're tired of it breaking down every time they go to use it and they can't afford to keep sending it back to get repaired. Another thing you got to consider. So I've had a couple people talk about that with me, but there are also a lot of people that just love it. So it's going to be very much up to the individual. So the main thing was where to start when you start preserving your food, where it's not going to cost you so much money, where you can get started right away. And that's going to be dehydrating. And as you're doing that, little by little, start saving up and shopping secondhand for the products you might need, be it jars, dehydrators, freeze dryers, canners, and so on, that you could possibly find secondhand. And if you can't, well then just keep saving your shekels as you save money on other things by buying in bulk and so on and so forth, that you can then put towards that equipment as you go along. Don't feel pressured into just buying everything, even a pressure canner or a dehydrator, until you learn more about it and start working with these things a little bit at a time, just like I did. This was quite a few years long process to get where I'm at now. And just like with the freeze dryer, I've decided I absolutely do not need one. And you'll be able to figure out by just doing your own research and just starting small what's going to be most important to you, what you like the best, and what's going to be easiest for you as well. So that's going to have a lot of play in it too. Please, if you have any other ideas you would like to throw in there to help people save money that are just getting started in preserving their foods, what is a good place that you think people should start investing their time and money into first, or hopefully no money at all if they can, to start putting up food for themselves for the hard times that we're already seeing now, and that could very possibly get worse. And even if they don't, it's good to know that you've got that food put up for anything that happens, even if it just simply means your town gets snowed in and the trucks can't get through to stock up the stores like has happened to us before. And that's happened a couple different times. One was a snowstorm, one was a rainstorm that washed out the roads, and that happens, and it might be a few days before the store's carrying what you need. So knowing you have the stuff in food storage ready to go to get you through those moments is really wonderful, and makes life so much less stressful and easy. All right, well, thanks for watching. Take care, and God bless.